clearing at the top of the hill stood a circle of bells. Dozens, hundreds of them, each suspended in midair, glowing faintly with their own light. The bells swayed gently, though there was no wind, and together they hummed a tone that resonated deep in Riku's chest. The fox stopped, looking up at him, and then leapt into the center of the circle. The golden path extended like a bridge of light into the center, guiding Riku forward. He stepped carefully, holding the winter bell close. As he approached, he realized the circle was not just bells. It was a living map of time. Each bell represented a moment from the past year, shimmering memories that hovered like fragile lanterns. Laughter, tears, victories, regrets. Riku's breath caught. He saw himself, small, restless, curious, walking through the town, discovering the bell, following the fox. And he saw the faces of everyone he loved. His parents kneading dough in a warm kitchen, neighbors hanging lanterns, children laughing in the snow. And then, in the darker shadows, he saw the regrets he hadn't yet released, the words left unspoken, the dreams he had forgotten to chase. The deer-like creature from the pond appeared beside him, translucent and radiant. Its antlers glimmered like frost catching the sun. "It is time," it said, its voice echoing not in the air but in his mind. "Ring the bell. Release the old year, embrace the new. Only by acknowledging the past can you step forward." Riku held the bell high. Its warmth spread through his fingers, up his arms, and into his chest, filling him with a light he hadn't known existed. He closed his eyes and shook it gently. The sound that came out was unlike any ordinary bell. It was a chorus of laughter and tears, wind and river, stars and snowflakes. The other bells trembled and began to ring in harmony, creating a melody that swelled into the sky. The shadows of regret began to dissolve, turning into silver sparks that floated upward like fireflies. Every heartbeat of the year past, every memory, every moment of fear or hesitation was acknowledged, forgiven, and set free. And then, in the final instant before midnight, the wind carried the sound across the land. The sky above exploded with gentle auroras, colors that danced and shimmered in ways that seemed impossible. Snowflakes fell like glimmering confetti, each one catching the light and sparkling as if the stars themselves had descended to earth. Riku opened his eyes to see the fox and the deer-like creature smiling at him. He felt lighter, braver, as though the weight of an entire year had lifted. He realized, for the first time, that beginnings were not just about new calendars or resolutions. They were about courage, acknowledgement, and the willingness to carry hope forward to see that moment. The bell in his hand stopped vibrating, but instead of fading, its warmth remained, a quiet pulse of promise. Riku tucked it safely in his coat and looked out at the valley below. The town of Tsubanami glittered in the snow, the lights from chimneys and windows twinkling like stars reflected on earth. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, mingling with the hum of bells. The deer bowed its head, the fox nuzzled Riku's leg, and then, like mist, they vanished into the night, leaving him alone atop the hill, but not lonely. He understood now. The magic wasn't only in the bells or the fox, or even the golden path. It was in him, in the way he chose to see, to feel, to carry hope forward into a new year. Riku descended the hill with the first step of the new year, each footfall lighter than the last. He thought of the people he loved, the memories he would cherish, and the dreams he would dare to follow. When he reached the stone bridge, the town still slumbered, unaware of the spectacle above them. Yet somehow, everything had shifted. The air felt brighter, the snow softer, the world more alive. And in his pocket, the winter bell waited, a quiet reminder that no matter how many years passed, the heartbeat of magic, courage, and new beginnings would always be within reach. The year had ended. A new one had begun, and Riku, small, restless, curious, and full of hope, walked forward, carrying both the past and the promise of tomorrow in his hands. The last week of December always seemed different in the little town of Tsubanami. Even though it was a quiet place, cradled between rolling hills and the silver shimmer of a frozen river, something about the days just before New Year's made it feel as though the air itself had been sprinkled with magic. On these days, the wind wasn't merely cold. It whispered secrets, playful and delicate, teasing the edges of the imagination, and carrying the faint smell of pine smoke from the chimneys. In a small house perched at the top of a hill lived 12-year-old Riku. His hair, the color of chestnuts that had been bleached in the winter sun, always fell into his eyes, and he liked it that way, because it made him feel as though he were peeking at the world through a secret window. Riku's parents were bakers, known for their sweet rolls and the peculiar little bread shaped like tiny animals, each one kissed with a sprinkle of sugar and cinnamon. But today, their hands were full, kneading dough and preparing for the last orders before the town's New Year festival. Riku, who always felt slightly too restless for small-town life, wandered outside into the crisp air. The sky was a pale watercolor, shifting from a soft gray to the faintest hint of pink near the horizon. Snow lay in thin, glittering layers on rooftops and tree branches, and Riku could hear the quiet crunch under his boots as he walked along the winding paths. He carried a small notebook in his coat pocket, filled with sketches of things that intrigued him. The way icicles clung to wooden beams like crystal daggers, the curious expressions of birds perched too close to chimneys, and the faces of strangers who looked like they were carrying stories in their eyes. As he walked, Riku noticed a figure moving slowly through the snow near the old stone bridge. It was an elderly man, hunched beneath a coat that had seen better winters, carrying a bundle wrapped in paper that rattled like fragile bones. The man's steps were deliberate, careful, and Riku felt a tug of curiosity he couldn't resist. "Good afternoon," Riku called out, his voice cutting through the hush of the town. The man looked up, and Riku saw that his eyes were pale, like winter ice, yet they carried a warmth that seemed to glow from within. "Ah," the man said, in a voice that sounded like wind rustling through reeds. "Good afternoon, young one. You're walking the paths when most are indoors. Careful. You might stumble into something you weren't meant to see." Riku's heart thumped. "Something I'm not meant to see?" he echoed, leaning closer. The man chuckled, a sound that seemed to echo across the frozen river. Perhaps it's something you are meant to find." He lifted the bundle, and for a moment, Riku thought he saw tiny lights flickering inside, like lanterns captured in glass. Then, as quickly as the thought appeared, it was gone. The man continued on his way, leaving Riku staring after him, the wind tugging at his scarf and the fading light making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. Unable to resist, Riku followed the man across the bridge. The river beneath was slow and heavy with ice, but somewhere near the bend, he saw movement, tiny flashes of silver darting beneath the frozen surface. He shivered, not from the cold, but from the thrill of it. He felt as though the river itself were alive, a quiet guardian of secrets too delicate for ordinary eyes. By the time Riku reached the end of the bridge, the man had vanished. In his place, a single bell lay on the snow. It was no bigger than an apple, and yet it vibrated faintly, humming with a tone that made the air feel lighter, as though the world itself had taken a deep, sleepy breath. Riku picked up the bell. It was warm in his hands, as though it had been waiting for him. When he shook it gently, the sound that came out was not just a note, but a pulse, a tiny heartbeat echoing across the empty streets. And in that heartbeat, Riku thought he heard whispers, laughter, footsteps, and a voice that seemed almost like his own, saying, "Follow the path where the sky meets the snow, and you will see the year begin anew." He tucked the bell into his coat and ran home, barely noticing the sun dipping below the hills, painting the clouds a deep violet. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and baking bread, but Riku couldn't shake the feeling that outside, the world had shifted, just a little, and that something remarkable was waiting to bloom in the frost. That night, as the first stars appeared, Riku lay in bed listening to the quiet tick of the clock and the occasional hoot of an owl. The bell sat on his nightstand, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. He wanted to think it was just a dream, but his fingers traced the smooth metal, and he felt the faint vibration still pulsing in his palm. Outside, the wind carried hints of snow, of lanterns, and of things that only came once a year, when the old year let go and the new one was born. And somewhere beyond the hills, Riku felt certain, the whispers of the winter bell were already beginning to move. The morning after Riku found the bell, The town of Tsubanami awoke to a world brushed with frost. Every rooftop, every tree branch, glistened as if coated in sugar, and the river reflected the pale winter sun like a mirror stretched across the valley. Riku dressed quickly, tucking the bell safely into his coat. The warmth of it against his chest felt like a secret he alone could carry. He stepped outside and noticed that something had shifted. The wind, usually playful and light, now moved with purpose. It curled around the corners of buildings, through narrow alleys, and into the cracks between the wooden boards of fences. It whispered, teasing at the edges of his ears, tugging at his scarf, beckoning him to follow without fully understanding why. Riku obeyed. The bell's faint vibration seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, guiding his steps. As he walked past the stone bridge where he had first seen the old man, Riku noticed something remarkable. The river beneath the ice was moving differently. Shapes darted beneath the frozen surface, silver streaks twisting and turning as if the water itself were alive. And then, just ahead, he saw it. A narrow trail of light, dancing across the snow, weaving toward the hills that framed the town. Riku hesitated. In all his life, he had never ventured beyond the small town limits, never crossed the hills into the vast forest that the villagers spoke of only in whispers. But the bell seemed to hum louder, almost impatiently, and the trail of light beckoned him forward. Heart pounding with excitement, he stepped onto the path. The forest was quiet, yet not silent. Snow crunched softly under his boots, and occasional gusts of wind carried the faintest chimes, like echoes of bells far away. Trees stretched tall, their bare branches etched against the sky like delicate filigree. And then, as he reached a small clearing, Riku saw her. A fox, but not an ordinary fox. Its fur shimmered with the colors of twilight, silver at the tips of its ears, gold along its paws, and eyes that glowed like warm lanterns. The fox tilted its head, regarding Riku with a curious intelligence. Then, as though deciding he was worthy, it stepped forward and began to walk, pausing to look back at him. Riku realized instinctively that this was his guide, that he followed the fox through the forest, deeper than he had ever gone before. The trees grew taller, older, and the snow beneath his feet softened into moss and fallen leaves. Strange, luminous flowers bloomed in the undergrowth, their petals opening despite the cold, releasing faint scents of vanilla and cinnamon. Riku's breath came in clouds, and with each step, the bell vibrated more insistently. After what felt like hours, they reached a small frozen pond. The ice reflected the sky like a giant glass mirror, but something stirred beneath its surface. Riku felt the hum of the bell grow stronger, and then the ice cracked, not violently, but gently, like it had been waiting for this moment. From beneath the surface rose a creature of water and light, shaped vaguely like a deer but transparent, its antlers branching into patterns of frost that sparkled like starlight. The fox bowed its head, and the creature spoke, not in words, but in thoughts that flowed directly into Riku's mind. "You have been chosen to carry the winter bell," it said. "For the end of the year is a doorway, and only those who listen can guide the old year into the new. But beware, the path is fragile, and many shadows linger where the frost is deepest." Riku felt both fear and wonder. "Shadows?" he asked silently. "Doubt, regret, forgotten dreams. They cling to the hearts of all who hesitate. Only those with courage and a willingness to follow the whispers of the bell can pass through." Riku's fingers tightened around the bell. He felt a determination rising in him, fierce and untested, like the first sparks of a fire. He was no longer a boy wandering the snowy streets of a sleepy town. He was a traveler, a guardian of something delicate and precious, standing on the edge of a world where magic and reality intertwined. The deer-like creature lowered its antlers, sending a ripple across the ice that spread outward like a glowing map. A path of golden light appeared, stretching from the pond, through the forest, and toward a hill that seemed to rise above the clouds themselves. The fox glanced back at Riku once more, its eyes gleaming with encouragement. Then, without hesitation, it began to walk along the glowing path. Riku followed, the bell in his coat vibrating like a tiny drum inside his chest. Behind him, the forest seemed to exhale, and the shadows of old regrets and forgotten hopes lingered just beyond the edges of the light. But they did not touch him, not yet. The only thing that mattered was the journey forward, toward the hill, toward the unknown, toward the new year waiting to be born. And as he climbed higher, snowflakes began to fall again, heavier this time, sparkling as if each carried a tiny fragment of the stars. And somewhere above, hidden beyond the clouds, the faintest peal of a bell rang. Not just his, but many bells, ringing together in a song that could only be heard when one truly listened. Riku didn't know what awaited him at the top of the hill, but he knew one thing. The year was ending, and he was moving with it, carrying the heartbeat of something extraordinary in his hands. And in the quiet spaces between the snowflakes, he thought he heard a voice, gentle, echoing, and full of promise, whispering, "The sky is waiting for you. Do not be afraid."